All right, hey, as always, just a little bit late, but I'm sure you don't care. You probably prepared yourself by getting a cup of coffee and all of that nonsense. Now today, what I have planned, let me, I'm always worried I'm going to expose some sort of super top secret stuff. I used to work in M&A, and I found the best way to not expose super top secret stuff was to not know any super top secret stuff, which I try to practice with extreme vigilance nowadays. M&A is sort of fun in the sense that like you get to see a lot of things, and I'll tell you what, it's not fun when you're out seeing the wild krats with your kids and you got your son on your shoulder, and then some ding dong investment banker that you work with calls you up and wants to get an estimate that's impossible to make for a software company, or a valuation, or kind of like dig out some sort of obscure number they might have. But whatever. Doesn't everyone like a challenge? And really, how entertaining are the wildcrats going to be with that? Now, this person in particular actually was, boy, they were great at their job, and I really admired them a lot. But I was already as a hot Austin day, and it was already a little annoying. Anyhow, I cleared my screens there. Let me show you the agenda that I got going here. I think I like this HackMD thing for paying attention to stuff. But what I want to go over is basically looking. I have yet another EBC. Now, if you listen to Software Defined Talk, my other podcast last night, I guess that the audio hasn't been published, but we live streamed it. As always, if you wanted to hear about elder care, you should have turned in 2 days ago when we were broadcasting about pet care. But we actually talked a lot about EBC stuff. If you're interested, if you go to softwaredefinedtalk.com, if you're really into the inside baseball, you can look that up. But I have one coming up next week. And what's been requested is what I would call my standard stump speech, if you will, the kind of talk that I tend to give. And what people want to know, I mean, it's good because it's what I know about, is sort of case studies and how-tos of how large organizations get better at software and the operation stuff. I mean, basically how they do the whole Tanzu thing and the way that our competitors would talk about it, how they do that. So I base a lot based on every time I give this talk, I change it a little bit, but it's been a while, so I have a lot of changes to it, and I've even kind of mixed it together with the culture talk that I give. So I'm going to basically go over a rehearsal presentation of that and kind of see what's happening there. I'm going to have to assemble it a little bit more before we start. And then I've just got some small closing notes about a video that I saw, and it made me think of a good sort of mindset metaphor. So let's go over first, before I start, a little bit of like when I'm putting a talk together, what am I going for, right? Like what's the process that I go? And, I don't know. This is almost like watching someone play Minecraft, right? Except I'm not going to yell and be astonished at things like, whoa, they used this. Maybe I should. Whoa, look at that. They used a stack bar chart. Wow, I really wasn't expecting that. And look at that going down there. Wow, sticky notes. Oh, my kids watch a lot of these, so I'm trying to learn from them how to do this sort of nonsense, this streaming that everyone loves so much. Anyhow, first, let me start with opening up my presentation here. I was working on this a little bit. One of the nice things about working from home is, and if you have slides, is that you can sort of sit there and noodle around on your slides while you're, watching your daughter and making silly faces at her and things like that. And I think you've seen her here before. She's of great help. Sorry, I'm not staring at you, but I'm trying to find. Where do I keep all of this stuff? There we go. I don't know how you manage your files, but boy, there really is. There's really no great way of doing it. It's kind of all over the place. So I'm gonna open up this presentation now. You remember one of my favorite things is to use the I forget what they call it, the lightbox mode. That mode where you can see all the slides and kind of get oriented. And I'll give you a little kind of tour of what's going on here. Now, you might have seen me do this talk before. There's a lot of things mixed in here, and listen, the way if you're giving a talk over and over again, wait, this isn't the right presentation. See, what happened here is there's some sync problems. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna get the laptop where I had the correct presentation, and I'm gonna have to send it over. This is exactly what happens in normal EVCs and any sort of presentation that you may be doing for someone. Is inevitably there is some issue just getting your slides up. It's almost like guaranteed to happen. Now this one keeps telling me it has some error saving it, which is I'm going to type in nonsense. So, and yet it can save it to the desktop. It tells me there's a upload failed, so I've saved it to my Mac. Now, what I'm going to do here is use this is a lot like the Minecraft yellers that my kids watch. They're like, well, we're going to go in here and I'm going to use AirDrop to send a block over. It's really going to be, this is great. I'm going to have to use some parkour with the files. And I don't know, is that still popular with the kids? Parkour in Minecraft? My son started doing these things where he's like, here's how people open doors in Minecraft and Fortnite and Modern Warfare. I don't know. I mean, obviously he knows about those because he watches them in the YouTube, as it were. So now, let me go over here to the desktop, or actually, I guess it would be in my. Speaking of revealing secret information, I better put that over there. Maybe there's something that you're not supposed to know about. So now, let me open this back up, and you'll get an overview of what's going on here. So we'll go into the slide sorter. Now, what I've done here, well, first of all, you got your default corporate decks. Press slides, templates. Now, those are nice to kind of hew to because you're going to want to share slides to people. Now, we have a light and a dark version. So I kind of did maybe I'll go over this some other time, but I kind of mixed some stuff in here. But you'll see the main thing is I have a little VMware logo there at the bottom. Now, this is one of those EVC talks where they don't want to hear a vendor pitch. So I'm trying not to actually name products that we have. I'm never quite sure what Don't Give Us a Vendor Pitch is like about. I mean, I'm being snarky about it. I know exactly what it's about. They want you to tell them practices and things. They want to tell you the behaviors and technologies and what happens and why things are better because you're behaving in a new way after you may or may not use the technology. And of course, they're just looking to get some education about how things are operating. Totally fine, whatever. But what I've got going in here is I don't really talk about the Tanzu stuff. Obviously, most everything I talk about is based on Tanzu customers. But what I'm trying to do is I'm melding together, going over how is software done, how do people get better at software, how do they change their organization, all the things people want to know. So I've melded together two talks that I have. One, my standard talk that just kind of catalogs things from my books up here, but also a talk that goes over culture change. Now, I was in the middle of updating some slides here. I'm not giving the culture change talk, so I'm taking out basically anything that is culture related. And I think what I'm going to do is probably, as I'm going to take out the Q&A because I want to have a resting slide that has my good stuff. I'm going to need to update that. But I was taking some notes over here in, things I wanted to update, right? Spring One platform things that I had. And one of the main things, I haven't really gotten all of this that I want yet, so I'm going to have to, DevonNote has this annoying thing where it won't copy an image. There's a lot of problems with it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in and get the screenshot from this slide. And this is from, I think I alluded to it, but this is from Spring One, and it's an Air France KLM presentation. And we'll see if everything synced up. Yep. So if you know what you're doing, but what you can do is we upload all of the slides from the talks to SlideShare. So you can go and actually just get these slides, which is great because then if you want to kind of reference them and build on top of them, it's not actually this one. I use that somewhere else. But It's the TD Ameritrade one. But you can go in and find these slides and start to use them. And I find that, let's see, where is that one? Let me see what it's measuring about ROI. I find that like it's a lot better when you're going over case studies to actually directly use the slides that the customers, the actual users use, right? Like, because, I don't know if you've seen a lot of corporate slides, but whenever you have a corporate slide, basically what it's saying is, we are awesome, right? So, like, it's not really extremely trustworthy, right? And I think it's much better to kind of come in. I'm doing this really roughly just to get to it. As I go over this, I think I will probably change this around, but this will be a good sort of holding thing from here because I'm having to look around my camera. That's why I keep craning around. But I think this will allow me to kind of speak to the kind of, you'll see, the kind of thing that I get to. So this is going to look super ugly, but one metric that matters to, what would be the word? To work with executives. That's a terrible title. But you'll see if I come over here, what I'm going to be able to do is I've kind of like summed up kind of the point that they were making here. So I'm going to bring this into the note, and as I'm rehearsing it, that way I can glance down. Because like the thing with me is I often forget what it is I wanted to talk about, which I guess is obvious. But I end up talking about something else. And so I don't get a chance to like focus on what I was actually going after, right? And so that's why a lot of the slides that I use, I've tried to get better about this, but like these kind of slides, this is basically more to remind me of what what I wanted to talk about. Because the problem is very, very often, especially if you're presenting online, like Zoom really screws this up, but you won't actually get to see your slide notes, right? And imagine that you have some presentation that's going horribly wrong and you have to email some slides to someone and they're stepping through it. And it's just like, chances are you're going to lose your slide notes. So you cannot really depend on slide notes. So I think that's also one reason why you see very busy slides. Also, like, as I mentioned I'll have to go over this at some point, I guess, but like slides that are just like big pictures, I think in corporate settings are not helpful. They're not really like a document that people are looking for. So I think that is the main thing. Now I'm also to building up credibility, but over the years I've also noticed it's also so that I can go look things up and remember where I got it from and who I was talking to. I'm like very maniacal about putting citations in with links directly to the things. And again, this like helps with credibility, but it also helps when you're sharing slides with others and when you're trying to remember yourself. And also for people who are reading it, right? Like it makes it a research document, right? Like often I come in and talk with them and, as is the case here, they're like, we want to learn, right? Like we want to know how other people are operating and how they're doing. And like, if you don't have citations in there that they can actually follow, then it's going to be hard for them to do that. Now, again, I'm just kind of filling time here while I'm craning my neck around for some ridiculous reason, but I'll have to fix these later. This is actually that corporate development investment banker guy I was complaining about at the beginning. This is something I learned from him, is that arts and crafts, as he called it, is extremely important. And I think he's right. Like it is very important to get these little things correct. There it is. I totally screwed up. I'll have to come in here again and add a link to that. But I like to have those citations in there just because it kind of adds credibility and really helps out with things. Now, I've got 45 minutes slotted for this, which is not really going to work out very well. I always have way too much content, especially at the end. But I think I can figure that out. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to just delete this one because I never really get to that. And that one, is an extremely important point, but like we don't really need to go over it. And then let's get rid of this guy. That's probably good. So let's talk about, okay, so starting small. It's always hard to know, but I want to emphasize that, starting small and scaling out. And then do I want to talk about internal marketing? Yes. We'll come to that. And then at the end, we'll close out with metric stuff, I think. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens here. So let's go ahead and start with it. And what I'm going to do is I am going to keep it in this mode, try to make it as sort of useful as possible for you following along at home. I should have a version of this that is not so long, but whatever. You'll be fine. I think you'll be able to figure it out. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have to adjust my camera so that I don't have to keep doing this. That's really annoying, but that's fine. I can see it over there too. Now let me take my commemorative Mark Heckler sip of coffee. That's good stuff. I always enjoy some coffee. Right away, you got to close the parenthesis, or the whole rest of the presentation is going to be just a parenthetical off the title. That would strain credibility, and then people would either decide to build their own platform or go to a competitor and not work with us at all. Just to totally ruin the EVC right there. Let's save that file. So, see, fonts can't be saved. I don't know what's happening. You know, I'm going to apparently have to go through, and I forget how you fix the font thing. I think you go up. Anyways, let's not worry about it. So, hey, thanks for having me here. I want to go over basically a summary of a lot of the work, the type of work that I do, which is really looking at large organizations and figuring out not only how they improve the way they do their software or change the way they do operations and the way they build their infrastructure, put a cloud strategy in place, but a little bit of why they do it and how they use it to improve their business or the way that they operate. And so this is going to mix together. And in the short amount of time we have here is normally I wouldn't talk about the time. I try not to talk about the talk, but so I probably won't do that. But what this is going to mix together is kind of going over a little bit, several case studies, the technologies that are used, the practices that are used. But the most important part that I find when it comes to how to improve and transform large organizations is really how executives, how management, how the organization and culture needs to change. And I think that's one of the least covered aspects. And I've been lucky working at Pivotal for a long time, having been an industry analyst, and now working in VMware Tanzu. Now, as common listeners know, once I've said VMware Tanzu, I can just start saying Tanzu afterwards, but I might slip up and use both words a couple times. We'll see. So just as an introduction to myself, this is me, Kote. Like I sort of mentioned, I do a lot of studying of how large organizations get better at software, kind of up and down the managerial stack, and I publish a lot of stuff. I have a couple of podcasts. You know, I do actually sort of a daily show where I go over sort of interesting things in this area of digital transformation and software. If you want to check that out, it's all available, pretty easy to find. You can get a copy of those books for free if you find the type of stuff I talk about interesting, but mostly what I talk about is in those books. They're pretty short. As mentioned, what I want to go over is how large organizations are improving their software. And I'm going to start, I always like to start with dessert, but with a small story that represents the end goal of getting better at software and going through all this change. And that is, here we go. Oh, it changed. So this is a story from one of our customers from Daimler. And there's a team at Daimler that is in charge for sort of the front end of the retail experience of buying a car, right? So they run the site that you go to search for different cars, configure them, and sort of like start to build up on your own your dream car. And eventually you can find a dealership and book a meeting there. And depending on the region you're in and what the laws determine for how buying works, you know, all sorts of things. But the important thing to think about is this is a software-driven storefront for customers. And nowadays, especially when people don't leave the house much, you can imagine this is very important. So anyways, they have been working for a while to up and down the stack, improve the way that developers do things, operations do things. They have a dramatically different organization than a traditional organization. And I want to tell you how all of that comes together, where I'll talk about that, results in very positively affecting the business and really changing IT into a tool of business, an enabler, as we used to say. So in that search site, because the developers, the product teams, had this mentality of we're using software to run the business, to innovate, to make our customers' lives better, they're constantly looking around at what users are doing with their software. And one of the things they found that was interesting is that when people were looking for cars, there was a significant amount of searches that came up for these Sprinter vans, which you see everywhere, right? Now, the Sprinter vans, of course, were professional vans. They're not vans that people use, for their day-to-day pleasure and their normal life. They're for ice cream sellers like this, or plumbers, delivery things. So logically, business-wise, because there's a different customer base, a different channel for selling, a different strategy, these Sprinter vans are in entirely different business unit than the sedans that you have with, Mercedes-Benz and things like that. Definitely, so forth and so on. So over the years, this has logically meant that the way that most organizations operate, those two IT organizations, or silos, we would say in a derogatory way, they're completely separate. And so there were no results when consumers were searching for cars. But the team was curious about this, and being sort of a humane, people-centric sort of mindset, or product-centric mindset, they came up with a theory that maybe if people were searching for this, it might be that they're interested in it, and that they should start to surface and show search results for that, not in their software. So they went through a tremendous amount of work. Let me see what the next slide is here. Yeah, so they went through a tremendous amount of work to get to kind of run through and figure out a way to change the way the business functioned. Now, the way they did this is with a very kind of simple to understand, let's say, thought technology, but something that I think is at the core of what it means to change and get better at software. Putting this way of thinking and all of the tools and the culture and process in place to get to this way of thinking is all the organizations I talk to, this is key to what they do. Now, I call this a small batch loop, but it has all sorts of names. I mean, it's a very empirical way of doing things. So what the team at Daimler and at so many other organizations that I'll cite here, what they're able to do is they come up with a theory based on, doesn't really matter what it's based on, hopefully observation or just trying to innovate. And they come up with a theory that, like, people are searching for these Sprinter vans. If we showed them search results for them, they might be interested in buying them. Now, that's a pretty big theory. So what they do is they figure out, all right, so let's think about if we actually did that, how would we measure if our theory was right or not? And let's do the code, right? Let's run the experiment and put it in front of end users and see what the results were, and kind of incrementally go through this until we've fully thought out and kind of planned out this theory, discovered new things, right? So usually this loop you go through on a weekly cycle, right? So the Sprinter van thing is pretty large-grained, right? Like, these experiments might be something as different as, like, just changing the way you enter a field into a form, or adding, combining together steps in a workflow, or whatever, right? Whatever the feature may be. But you go through this on a weekly cycle, and you're constantly testing out what your theory of how to improve the software is. And the important part is actually getting it in front of users and responding and tracking if you've improved it, right? Now, this is in contrast to, what people call a big waterfall process, where you specify a bunch of features, the software that you want, and you deploy like a gigantic collection of stuff, usually on a 6, 12 or more month cycle. And you sort of have delivered on that project of what the features are. But this is more of an exploratory, experimental, even kind of scientific cycle of discovery and learning that you're going through. So Daimler went through this cycle, and what they discovered, as you can imagine, right? And I'll go over a few examples that are not so obvious in retrospect, but what they discovered is that people actually did want to buy, regular people buy these Sprinter vans, one, just to buy them on their own, but often they would want to buy them for RVs, for vacations, like the Kinesis here. And so it actually became a new way of thinking about the business that was discovered by IT, right? That was discovered by this small batch process and this product-centric way of doing things. Which, if you think about it, right, like we obsess in IT about business IT alignment. Boy, I'm really into my hands here. It's kind of fun, and how we can help enable the business and not just be like a cost center and so forth. And that's why I like this example so much. Is it's because IT had transformed and was operating in a new way that they went back to the Sprinter business unit, and they actually helped innovate and change their business and started bringing in brand new revenue. Now, a lot of the organizations that I've talked with and we work with, right, they get very similar results by going through this kind of transformation that I'll spend the rest of the presentation kind of going over what it looks like, how they operate, and as I mentioned, how executives change. So you can see some results here. And I like to think of kind of the benefits both in technical improvements and also business improvements, right? Because technical improvements are definitely good, right? Your efficiencies you have in the way you deploy your software, your ability to patch more. But again, like if you're not actually improving the business, right? You're not actually improving whatever the goals you have of your organization, all of the technical improvements that you're going to do are not really going to amount to very much. They might amount to some cost savings, but you're not really going to achieve the goal of the overall organization. Now, and usually I have to kind of speed through this slide as much as I would like to talk about it on and on, but you have a limited amount of time. Now, despite that, I think usually we're very early in those kind of success rates. And sorry for the coloring of this. I gotta fix it up. It looks pretty crappy. But I love these jelly donuts. So most organizations are not really at the point where they can get results like that reliably, right? They're operating under more traditional ways of doing things. And, as you can see, I need to fix that Standish group thing. Cutting and pasting slides has messed things up there. But when I've looked at I think it's 13 or 15 years of kind of surveys of success, only about 30% of them pretty consistently over time, it wavers here and there, but we don't really see this much success with software projects over the years. And I think those kind of sad donuts tell you some of the tracers, right? Is organizations haven't made the changes to get to the point where they can release their software frequently enough to get that small batch process in place, to get that feedback loop in place, to really make it so that IT is one of the innovation engines of the business and one of the key tools of how businesses are run. So let me go over a quick summary, kind of based on BT's sort of journey here, of what the journey typically looks like, what organizations go through when they want to get to those positive results and be on the right side of that 30% of software success. So typically, they start very small, right? So they start off by picking one project that they want to improve, maybe two projects. And they don't start with the technology that they want to use. They don't start with the huge strategy for transforming a multi-year analysis or a plan for what they want to do. They start with a business need, with an application. Now, this is just the beginning of what they do. But in the case of BT, they picked something called Business Pass, which was not Business Pass, Sports Pass, adding on some sports channels to a bundle of channels that they have. Up in the UK, if you don't know BT, they sell cable and cell phones and networking and all sorts of stuff. So they pick this because they know that they have a huge existing estate of applications and services, but also the way they work with the business and processes to work on. But you pick this one application that's an actual business-facing revenue application, not just a POC or an experiment, and they basically do that. So they do all of the planning in a new way. They use new practices of doing Agile, new technologies that they would be running it on. And they're very disciplined in thinking about the problems that they encounter along the way. They try to predict some of the problems. That's why you end up using a different technology stack, a container-based way of doing things. But they often find that they encounter things that they had never thought of. In the case of BT, there's some networking issues that they came across. And in the cases of other people, there's often kind of the need to engage with the business side more and all sorts of back-end things that they rely on. But they start small in order to kind of have a lighthouse, to have a light shine on what it is we need to actually change. And as they go through this project, it's an actual real project. So one, they're discovering what their requirements are, what their features are, right? Like when you come to talk with someone like us in an EBC, right? And you have all sorts of needs for your transformation. Oftentimes that's kind of like the entire collection of things in a giant spreadsheet. But in this way, what you're doing is you're discovering the needs that you have and things maybe you don't need to attack at the moment. But equally importantly, what you're doing is you're learning the new process and you're building up credibility for what that new way of doing your development and your operations is, which, as we'll see, is going to be key for scaling that change and changing the organization as a whole. So they go through this journey with one application, with two, with three, and it kind of scales up. And one of the things they find is that having dedicated product teams, having developers, product managers, and designers who are doing, if you think back to the Daimler case, they're really focusing on that product is key to what they need to do. But they also find in operations and infrastructures, they put in place what I'll go over as a platform as a product approach, where the operations people start to think, as it says here, they start to think about the developers as their customers, right? And equally, as the developers are figuring out a new way of doing things, how to add that sports pass and study through that small batch, the operations people start to learn that they think about the customers as their products, and they're continually exploring and adapting to what the platform, what the infrastructure needs to be. So again, that's much better than planning up everything, doing a lot of planning up front, a tremendous amount, and then kind of like after 6 or 12 months, kind of like putting that platform out there that has all the things that you've tried to predict developers want, and then learning what they actually need and trying to convince them to come over to using it. But you've got this much more start small, kind of discover and grow to what the needs actually are approach. So let's talk about a little bit of detail of what those development teams end up doing when I look across those successful organizations, how they're operating, and then what the operations people look at. So again, they want to get to this small batch approach of doing things. And what they're focusing on is operationally, they want to achieve, let's call it speed, flow, and feedback, right? They want to start to use technologies. Obviously, they want to use more modern technologies, right? That goes without saying. But they want to achieve a speed of thinking about what they should be doing and getting that out the door, a constant, reliable flow, a velocity, we used to call it in Scrum, of the ability to know what you can get out the door and consistently get it released. And then they also want to have a product mentality where they're really paying attention to user feedback and that kind of feedback that we saw, for example, with Daimler, right? Now, to achieve all of that, these development teams try to focus as much as possible on the actual unique code, the actual business logic code, the application code. And they're relying increasingly on the architecture that something like Kubernetes and containers give to them, right? So instead of thinking about how they package up and coordinate all of the components of their application working with each other, they instead rely on the cloud native or the Kubernetes way of doing that. There's actually a very, if not talked about enough, a very good architecture implicit in doing container-based applications. Oftentimes, and part of that architecture is doing things in a microservices-based way. Increasingly, you see people dealing with the high velocity and the high amount of data by using eventing instead of a more serial way of doing data. And then also what they're starting to rely on is thinking about, and this is what we get to next with infrastructure people, is they're focusing on a platform as a service, right? A set of pre-specified and constantly guarded and improved ways of doing their application. Instead of spending a lot of their time on packaging things up and doing configuration management and release management and all that kind of stuff that comes with that really is underneath the actual application code. So I'm going to take another Mark Heckler commemorative sip of coffee. Even cold. Boy, I need some more of that stuff. So at the infrastructure sort of layer or the group, as I kind of talked about with that example from BT, infrastructure people take on a different mentality of providing services, right? Like instead of just providing a service and delivering on requirements, instead what they're doing is they're thinking about those development teams as their customers, right? And they're thinking about what can we do to make our customers, developers, work, even their lives better, right? And oftentimes what you find is that requires the infrastructure people to think beyond delivering a service to some specified set of requirements, and instead understand what their customers are doing, what developers are doing, and understand the complete end-to-end flow that it takes to get that software into production, right? And so what I often see infrastructure people doing is one of the first things they go through is they do a complete, you can think of it as a value stream or whatever, but all of the steps that it takes to actually think of something for a developer, get all the resources that they need, test it, package things up for deploying and having it in production and manage it, right? And then the infrastructure people start to break down how long each of those steps takes, the wait time that it takes, the amount of dependencies that you have on other people like auditors and security people or even enterprise architects. And they systematically think about how can we automate as much of that as possible? How can we standardize as much of that as possible? Now, at the raw infrastructure layer, because most organizations are putting their applications in containers, you can rely on containers and then Kubernetes, again, as a very implicit architecture, an almost constraining way to really start to automate, but also enforce governance and policy. So that's something that organizations rely on a tremendous amount, are the kind of technological architectures and automation that doing things in that way help out with. Now, also those organizations end up with a platform as a service with a whole bunch of things, types of middleware, databases, your build tools, even the frameworks and how those plug into this cycle. Like with a lot of our customers, they rely on the tight integration, if they're doing Java, with the Spring framework for doing all sorts of microservices architectures, the way it plugs into essentially the life cycle that you have in a container-based Kubernetes way of doing things. But also the ability, if you think about, again, to developers to provision things like databases and event services on their own, and also add in all of that observability, as we call it nowadays, that instrumentation for how things are managed. So again, it's really that shift in thinking about how infrastructure people operate that drives what they're doing, but also the tool choices that they have. So now, with that kind of quick understanding of what the stack looks like and kind of what the behaviors of the developers and the operations are, I want to go over two areas that are also important that come up all the time. It's like, sure, the technology is fine and we just need to pick one. I actually think the technology can be pretty difficult based on the amount of time it takes people to stand up these new stacks and, I don't know, the time spent and all of the trying to get things up and running and kind of sort through what's going. I mean, if the technology were easy, we would all just be doing it, but there actually is quite a bit going there. But arguably what's more mysterious, especially for a technologist, is figuring out the culture part. And I think what I've noticed organizations do is they focus on changing how they operate, changing what the norms in their culture are, by, again, starting small and changing what the behavior is, right? Like you have to start with individuals and you can't sort of mandate that we're going to do things this new way or even change an organization around. You've got to start small and focus on incrementally changing the behavior that people have. So, see, this is where I have trouble. I might collapse. I got to figure this out, but I'm just going to go through it. So what you see, and this is an example very recently, again, from our Spring One conference, but Air France KLM kind of went over how they had done modernization and how they're doing that, is I see most development teams following a similar pattern. Now, this is the pattern that we prescribe to people and we work with them for it, so that's probably why I see it. But it's a very common thing you see across the industry, that you collapse together several roles. You have developers, you have designers, people who think about the interaction, what workflows look like, what people want. You've got personas, but a designer is not so much who chooses colors, but they're thinking about how do we use software to represent best a person going through whatever task they have, and how do we constantly improve that? And then you have product managers, and a product manager is someone on this team who's always thinking about, they're that mixture of technical viability for something and what is the thing that we could do to next best have value in our software. Value either by making sure it's compliant and secure or more running better, or value in our software to the end users that we have to reduce the amount of time that it takes for someone to approve a mortgage application by putting this feature in. And there's a very disciplined approach that they go through in kind of thinking about and brainstorming and studying, if you think about that small batch loop, Like, what is this thing we're working on, right? Like, what problems are we solving for a user? Never minding our existing organization and software, what's the workflow that people go through, that kind of value stream that our users go through? And therefore, what application are we working on? And then let's work on improving that application and that weekly cycle. And then let's retrospectively, this kind of comes from the Scrum world, right? Let's retrospectively look at the validation of the experiments that we were doing and constantly go through and refine this, right? And what's key here is again, instead of delivering a project, right, delivering features that someone has asked for, you're continually discovering and learning by doing, improving that software. And getting to this mentality takes a lot of, this is why people are obsessed with culture, because people are used to just delivering on requirements. And this is where I want to go over just very briefly. We can talk about these details a little bit more if you like. Let me see. This is where I need to learn. What I'm going to need to do is I'm going to take out this Home Depot case, as fascinating as it is, but I need to kind of collapse things for time here. And so let's go to this. So these are the characteristics that I see organizations really wanting to put in place in those teams, right? You want to get these behaviors. And it's hard to say how you get to that, because for every organization, how you get to that is kind of dependent on the organization. I'll go over some of the ways that I've seen organizations encourage that way of thinking. But if you think about everything that I've gone over, right, like you want people to be innovative. You want them to be curious and come up with new ideas, the ways of doing things, not just deliver on preconceived notion requirements that you've given them, right? And in order to do that, you want them to, depending on what kind of business you're in, the idea of risk is a very negative, scary word. But by risk-taking, what I mean is they're not afraid to be proven wrong, right? They're not afraid to do something that turns out not to be the best idea, right? That doesn't necessarily mean, like jumping out of a plane without a parachute. What it means is that that the more things that you try, the more invalidation you get of what doesn't work, eventually you're going to get to the point where you've discovered the best way to represent something, and you're kind of improving something. Now, also, obviously, if you're using software as your sort of storefront, your number one interaction with the customer, you're going to need people and a process that really considers them, that's people-centric, right? So these are kind of the characteristics, the types of culture, the behavior you want to have in place. And these are the things that management initially and ongoing spends a tremendous amount of time kind of trying to get to and have people figure out getting to this point. And if you find yourself not targeting that, like it's pretty hard to get to the point where you're really improving the way that you do software. So what that implies is that these are the things that the organization gives them, that leadership sets up for them, right? And again, if you're in a managerial position and you're thinking about setting up these organizations, think about if your staff has this and what you would have to do to get to this point, right? And that is those product teams I was going over, they act pretty much autonomously, right? Like they don't wait around for other people to tell them what they should be doing or to validate what they should be doing, right? And instead, just like with the Daimler people, they're coming up with their own ideas and they have their own volition, and they're supported by a technology stack to get to that point. Now, that means and implies that they're actually trusted by the organization to do that, right? Now, this is always a touchy topic with people, but if you sort of don't trust your staff to act autonomously and really get to the point where they can do software that way, then maybe all this transformation is not for you, right? Like maybe you need to focus more on other things that you would optimize around. But you really do need to get to that point where you can trust your people to be innovative and kind of operate on their own. Now, that tactically, that also means that you're giving voice to these developers, right? You are genuinely interested in them driving the agenda and setting change and coming up with new things. Now, let me give you a quick example of that, right? This is with one of our customers in the food services industry. They manage not only delivery of food, but the way that kitchens are run in cafeterias. And there was this project given to the developers, which was, in order to make kitchens run more efficiently, we need to move all the recipes onto iPads so that there is more consistency in the way we do things. But because leadership had given them those attributes, the teams were acting autonomously and because they were people-centric, by actually observing what was happening in the kitchen, the developers, the product team, I mean, think about that. You've got a very way of operating where developers are watching what people are doing, right? They're visiting with the users of this. They discovered something new that was actually going to be more effective at delivering on that goal of efficiency, right? So that was the goal: is the more efficiency we have, the more consistency we have in the way things are executed, the better quality of the product, the better customer service, and also the better sort of profit we'll have. But people will like our business more and keep employing us versus competitors, and will be differentiated based on the quality of delivery, right? But what they found is that staff in kitchen were spending a huge amount of time checking the temperature of various things like mayonnaise and raw chicken. And this is a very manual, error-prone process of using those little thermometers and writing it down on paper and then having to input that around. So the team discovered something that was even more important to solve. And very easily, over several cycles, they were able to come up with a software-driven way of making that process of measuring things much more reliable, much more efficient, freeing up time for the kitchen staff to actually focus on higher value work. Now, eventually, they got to replacing the 3-ring binder of recipes to an iPad way of doing things. But overall, it really helped them achieve those goals that they had. That the business had, and it really changed the way things were operating. And again, it's another example of how IT directly affect and improve the business, rather than just sort of like, delivering a container-based stack, or delivering on a set of tools, or getting a bunch of people certified to operate in a new way. It really directly affected things, and so that's, I think, draws up a really great example of how you want the team to work, and what the consequences are for leadership, what you have to give the team, and what you would expect from them. Now, I think what I need to do here is I am going to pull this slide out. Let me, I'm really worked up about this slide and this slide. I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking what I do is I collapse this one. I don't know. I'll see. I'm going to have to go back and edit this for the final one so I can use it more of a reference. But anyways, let's get back to it. So hopefully that's a little bit enough of an overview of what the change looks like to get you interested in kind of digging deeper into that, or just kind of validating what it looks like, how these teams are working, and a little bit of an idea of how the culture changed over. But I think what I'm always also interested in is how you scale that in a large organization, because this is really the difference between a lot of the stuff that you can freely and easily read on the internet and at conferences and what actually happens in large organizations. It comes down to this. So let's go over, I talked about developers and operations people. Let's go over how executives need to transform, how management needs to transform their behaviors and their culture, which I think is actually the hardest part. I mean, I think technology is difficult, the behavior of your staff is difficult, but getting you yourself, the executive, to change is, I've found, really hard. Now, the first thing that I think is key is to take this very dimming way of thinking about things. And you as executives, you take on full responsibility and therefore operational concerns for really setting up what the point of everything is. Not only what the vision is, but how things should be operating. Now, you don't want to, it's a fine line between micromanaging things, but you do set up the factory, right? And I just kind of covered a little bit of what that factory looks like, what infrastructure provides, how development works and thinks about its job, right? So you're fine-tuning those tactics and really understanding how they work, and also always improving them and thinking about what they're actually doing. You don't want to completely just delegate to your organization and let them just figure everything out on their own. You want them to hone their skills and discover new things, but you really do have to know the tactics that are put in place and how they're operating. Now, another thing that I think is vital is to really spend continually a lot of time on what we would talk about as strategy or vision, and really move beyond a vision that is those kind of like not very useful, to kind of parody it. It's always like, we want to maximize our returns for shareholders, provide an excellent place to work for our staff, achieve what's needed for our customers, and be the best source for their fulfillment and their needs, and also give back to our community, right? Which those are all great goals. Those are sort of like, it's kind of like saying we would like to know how to eat without our mouth open and, be, clean up well for guests and be civilized. Those are things I would assume that organizations are doing. But when you're thinking about what your vision is, right, think about how that trickles down to something that on a daily, if not hourly basis, a principle that people can make decisions on. And I like to use this one because it really, you can see how it focuses if you're working on banking software, right? Like you don't want, every time you're making a decision about how to implement software, what they want you to think about DBS, what executives have spent a lot of time honing is whatever choice you're making, how does that make it so that one of our customers spends less time with us, less time banking, less time sorting out the software that they're using, less time thinking about what they're doing? How do we make their operations as efficient as possible, right? And in the BT example, as I recall, like you can see this in a metric that they track. There's a great metric where they essentially say we reduced the number of steps that a user went through from 11 to 6, and we reduced the time it takes them to go through a workflow. I think like the sports pass from like 13 minutes to just 3 minutes, right? And that constantly paying attention to how do we make our customers' lives and time better is a good focus that you want executives to have when you're coming up with a strategy. Now, another thing that comes up a lot is organization structure and how you kind of engineer scaling up this change. Now, as you know by now, I'm a huge advocate of starting small and slowly scaling up over the course of 6, 12, multiple years, right? Well, I should say 6 to 12 months and then multiple years after that. And the recent DevOps studies have kind of validated this and kind of the case studies and anecdotes that we've accumulated over the years. And that is the organic, almost, I hesitate to call it ground up because it is managed from the top well. But the more organic thing of starting with a small team, having another team, and really cloning the way that team operates and always refining it and then also when you come up with new teams, taking successful people from those teams, right? Think about the BT Sports Pass, the Daimler team, that team that went into the kitchen. You start to take some people from that team who are really good at working with others, and you seed them into new teams, new products that you're working on. But there's some good studies that show doing this team-based way of scaling up change and spreading it slowly is much better than swapping everything all over at once, even setting up a whole brand new organization and moving people up there. And it definitely works a lot better than the kind of classical centers of excellence and training kind of way of doing things. And what's really important about this as management is a very close, very engineered, so to speak, managed effort of looking at those teams, selecting the applications to work on, paying attention to what works and doesn't work, and finding the staff in those teams that then you add to the new team, and constantly be kind of building up almost a new organization based on these teams rather than just swapping everything over wholesale, right? So I really do think it's this incremental way of going through organization change that is much more successful with higher performing organizations. Now, part of that, which seems almost ridiculously simple, but I think is over and over again is shown as incredibly, I want to make a note to myself to use, there's a great picture from, I think it's from the KLM thing, use new internal marketing book slide thing. Oh, it's from the BT, from 2019 BT slides. I'm going to end up overusing this BT stuff, but what are you going to do? Anyhow, so is really to think about, especially in operations, right? In infrastructure, you're going to set up a new platform, a container-based platform and services around it and kind of implied ways of operating. And you're going to find, I would say most, 90% of organizations I talk with, they find that they spend a lot of time on setting up a new platform, and then they're shocked at how few people actually come to use it, right? They put all this care and feeding into it, and they expect that, once, in this almost platonic way, that once the developers and product teams out there see this great new platform, they'll just flock to it, and there'll be this pull to use it. But pretty much every organization I talk with, they're very disappointed by the uptake, right? People are just developers and BU people are really, they just don't do it. And so what they find is they have to spend a huge amount of time doing marketing and advocating and training and documenting, right? You really have to spend time driving people to that platform, no matter what you may be doing. So for the initial year or so, whoever is driving this initiative, and again, this is why management is so important, they have to spend time drawing people to it and kind of training them up on it. And what you start to do is, I always recommend having quarterly sort of internal conferences or road shows or whatever it takes to start. Initially, you go through and you take some of those initial teams and you have them advocate for, market, evangelize, if you will, for using that platform and go over what works and doesn't work and fielding questions from people. If you think about that, treating developers as your customer, this also gives you the opportunity to product manage the platform, the infrastructure that you're putting out. But you also end up documenting, kind of like as you see here from Duke Energy and when I put it in from BT, you end up incrementally documenting what the new process is, what the new technology is, the culture. And you continue doing this on a quarterly basis, and you'll find that this is a huge part of how you win people over, how you switch people over, and how you get to that point when you're scaling up those great effects and benefits that you have. And, you know, in the case of, for again, someone like BT, they have at least one person fully dedicated to this role, and they'll take some of the operations people who are running the platform and some of the developers and also move them around on that quarterly basis. Not move them around nowadays, but kind of run these internal events to help people out. So that effort of thinking about how you roll out and market things is incredibly important. So finally, there's a whole lot of other tactics that I'm not going over here that are written up in my book, and we can talk about if you have questions for them. But I think this is another key thing for executives when it comes especially not only to themselves, but if everyone has a boss, right? And even an executive who has been given a charter to improve and change how things are doing, they have to report to their boss. And they usually find with their bosses that maybe they're not so understanding about change, right? Like that they are constantly going to be questioning, you know, I told you to improve things and, you know, do things in a drastically different way. Why are you doing things in a drastically different way, right? Like, why are things so crazy and weird, right? How come they're not, you know, I mean, I'm being a little snarky here, but this is a study that we had recently about transformation. And as you can kind of see here, the way that I think when it comes to IT, but that or kind of managing that you sort of manage that transformation and report upward to the business and to other people is you start to talk in terms of the product strategy, right? It's fine to report on you know, performance metrics that you have and things like that, but you figure out a way to talk about what is the value that we're bringing, right? Like, what are the instances? What are things that represent actually improving the business, right? Like our ability to release things more frequently so we can get feedback, so we can discover things like in the kitchen example, right? How are we returning value, not just sort of having performance characteristics? Now, I want to go over one example recently that I think is a good representation of how you go through that process, right? And that is, I think there's a little bit of a contradiction here. So maybe what I'll do is, I think I'm going to take this slide out and say that, like, so let's talk about how you report success to your bosses. Everyone has a boss. All right, so I'll have to edit this out for the final one. But you three people in the live stream, you get to see the sausage being made. So internal marketing is important. So finally, everyone has a boss, right? So especially whether you're reporting on these things, also for your own, and in a managerial position, for your own sort of edification and checking on how you're doing things. I think it's important to come up with metrics that you're reporting to your management chain, also kind of showing that you're making progress, but really thinking about how you're monitoring what you're doing. And I think this is a great case study from TD Ameritrade, one of our customers, and they also talked at Spring One recently, so you can go check out that presentation. But they really walk through how they thought about metrics and how they were managing with that. Now, what they emphasized in starting up this transformation and scaling it up, they have all sorts of metrics that they went through, but that there's two things that I think are really vital. Is they always picked one metric that they would report on that was a proxy for showing the value and the progress of doing that, right? So for them, the transformation that they wanted to go through is they wanted to achieve that small batch cycle, right? Where they get those business benefits we were talking about because they've changed the way they do their software and changed the way they've operated. And so the way they were tracking that is how many applications, never mind teams or services or people or things like that, but how many applications or workloads do we have running on the new platform, right? Because when we move things to the new platform, it's going to have the ability to operate in a new way. And we're also, importantly for showing ROI and kind of getting authority to operate, that's when value is going to be achieved, right? Using some kind of lean thinking until no matter how much planning you're doing or installing things, until you've actually moved the application to that platform, you're not going to be delivering value. You're not going to be delivering on ROI. You're kind of not going to be doing anything. You've got this big inventory stacked up. So this is the one metric that they reported on early on in the process, right? And this was great for all of the bosses, the stakeholders that they had, because it allowed them to show progress by business unit, right? So there was almost some competition that you introduced. And this really gets to a lot of how you scale up transformation is you kind of rely on competition that you have amongst all of your peers and business units, is that you're showing, this one business unit is, they're progressing a lot more at replatforming their things versus this other business unit. But then also it might be the case that this other business unit is actually getting better at going all the way through to production. And so reporting on this, and they combine this together with some kind of statistical assumptions about the value of moving things over and reducing the time it would take, for developers to get things to production and kind of working through what they were doing. And they talked about how this was, cost takeout that they had. But this overall moving to a new way of operating is a way that they started reporting on this. And it really helped drive interest in and kind of competition for replatforming. So what's important here is finding that metric that's important. This would be a good place to say, to bring back, where was my metric slide? Why is that not working? What I should introduce here is, so let me put this back in because I can go over, let me put a note here that what I need to put back in is the put back in slide of metrics to pay attention to after the TD Ameritrade one, because then what I can do, it's kind of frustrating that it won't undo. Ooh, what typing am I undoing? Ooh, that's not good. Oh, there we go. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring back this slide and say, that's one metric that they used. Yeah. So now what's interesting about this, I think, is that after they focused on this metric initially, they realized that the issue that they had, as you can see, is that people were moving their applications to this new platform in development, but they weren't having that flow to moving things into production. So because that's what they wanted to change. That's the one metric they started tracking, and what that amounted to is basically what does it take? What's slowing people down to moving things to production? And let's track our progress in getting more and more apps to production and use that as a way of finding all that wait time, right? Like I mentioned earlier, like we're talking about what operations does. Let's focus on all the tasks it takes that people are waiting on, why it's slow. And that was the metric they reported on to show that there was this progress of going on, and also to kind of drive, really to focus everyone on removing wait time, automating things. And instead of focusing on delivering to plan, delivering a project, they're delivering to this outcome, this new desire that they have, and reporting on that metric. So, there's all sorts of other metrics that you can report on. But I think what's important when you're devising your metric, and this is kind of a survey that we did earlier this year about high-performing organizations versus low-performing ones who are doing their digital transformation strategy. But you can kind of see that some of the metrics that higher performing organizations, and that growth is their revenue growth, right? So higher performing ones, they have much more higher growth versus like losing growth. You can see that they kind of start thinking about more less performance-based things, but types of metrics that can be tracked back to putting that small batch cycle in place to really improving the flow and the way that organizations work. So that is a pretty quick kind of summary. Well, not even a summary, but it's kind of a selection working backwards, right, of some of the ways that executives start and management starts thinking differently to really change their organization, change the behaviors, and therefore change the culture, and really get to the point where IT is helping drive business quite a lot more. And then also it kind of gives you a bit of a roadmap for what the infrastructure changes look like, right? Like how operation changes the way they think, and a little bit of the technology that they use, how they put in place a platform, often built on top of Kubernetes. And they take on this new mentality of having kind of a customer-first platform as a product way of doing things. And then also how the development team really changes the way that they think and the way that they're operating as well, and what it takes from a management position to get there. And hopefully there's been a couple of case studies there, real-world examples that kind of show you the positive effect for that. So there's a bunch of things that I've left out here, but those things are covered again. If you want to go, you can get these books for free. I can also email them to you if you want to email me down there. But you can check out those to get kind of all the details, many more case studies. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions and kind of dig into whatever you're interested in. And thanks for making the time for it. So we'll see. 30 minutes for that. You get a 45-minute slot, but it's really 30 minutes. I might be able to kind of go over that. I'll have to go through and edit. If you've seen the replay, you'll see the edited version of that. But I'll edit down all my little fiddling around and practice it a few more times. I don't actually have till Thursday. I've got some syncing up with my co-presenters that I'll go through. But I think that gives me a pretty good start on doing things there. I think that worked out pretty well. You should give me some feedback. You can put some stuff in the chat window there, or if you're watching the replay or whatever, you can leave it on the YouTube thing where you watch that, or wherever. It'd be interesting to see what questions you have, because that really drives things. So with that, let me get rid of this, and let me go back to what my plan to talk about was. And so I want to show you, I was watching a video. There's all sorts of crazy stuff going on this week, especially if you're an American. Also if you're here in the Netherlands, we're sort of, I say we. I am very happy to be a guest of the Netherlands here. But as we watch, let me get this a little bigger. But all sorts of nutty stuff going on, and so I found it relaxing to kind of watch someone making some fried rice. And as you watch this, it's pretty long. It's definitely worth your time watching it. Now that is a gigantic pile of garlic, and I think that's some chicken that he put down. I took Japanese in junior high, but I don't remember any of it. But what you're gonna do, I'm gonna make this run kind of faster here. Where is the playback? But it's really worth your time to go watch this slowly. It'll really calm you down and center you, make you feel a lot better about life. But this is fried rice. Now, my mother, fried rice was a staple of growing up. There's a joke that for Americans, Chinese food is comfort food, is one of the most American foods that you have. Now, of course, what they mean is Chinese food they mean Americanized Chinese food. But fried rice is definitely one of those. I mean, it is one of the things that I love most in life, that I eat the least of, because I try not to eat a lot of carbs. My friend Mason in high school will attest to that. We used to eat tons of it. But I was taught to make fried rice in a wok, right? And the way that you make fried rice is you just take, obviously some rice, and you kind of take a little bit of sauce and your meat thing, and you take that bag of frozen vegetables with the peas and the carrots, and you dump it in there. And so the first thing that you notice about this fried rice is there is a mountain of garlic. Now, we'll see if you'll be able to remember this, but the amount of garlic that he had, the uncooked garlic, I'm pretty sure it's a he, that they. I don't want to presume some pronouns on them. But the volume of uncooked garlic that they use, I'm pretty sure is equivalent to the volume of rice that he puts on at the end. Now, that is a tremendous amount of garlic. Really going to win a bunch of friends after that, especially back home with your significant other and family as you're processing that. But there's something to be learned there, right? It's shocking. But in the same way that, like, if that talk you just heard, you're going to be going through this digital transformation. What you want is delicious rice. What you want is a better way of doing software that is really going to improve the way you're doing your business. Maybe let's just rest our assumptions there. He's burning the garlic. You're like, oh my God, what is going on there? This whole garlic way of doing things is blowing my mind. It's got to be terrible. Let's just coast past it. We are the ones who came to him to find a new, better way of making fried rice. We're the ones, we came to an outside party to tell us a new way of doing software. Let's just hear them out, right? They didn't come to us, although the case in a vendor, we often do come to you, but we came to them and didn't want to hear a vendor pitch. So let's just listen to the crazy notions that they have and stop objecting to it. So you start with that big pile of garlic. You start with this wacky new idea of unified teams that are operating in a totally different way. So you saw he cooked the garlic there. He's also got this very calming, very, Japanese way of doing things, very systematic and beautiful, right? Now, also, he's not cooking it in a wok. He's cooking it on a flat surface. So I always find wok cooking difficult. I think the problem is I don't have the right wok and I never heat it up enough. But there, see, that volume of rice is pretty close. It's a little bigger to the volume of garlic. Now, this is the thing that blew my mind. Oh my God. He put the egg on top of the rice. I have always learned that you cook the egg directly on the hot surface, not in the rice. And this is the brilliant part, is he's cooking the egg on the rice before putting the thing back in there. It looks like a hot, gooey mess, but it's creating a totally different experience than you'll get with normal fried rice, which is like these chunks of egg that have obviously been cooked on their own, chopped up and put into the egg. This is very different, and it's going to have this phenomenal different result. Also, he's got sticky rice, which is different than, the usual like kind of leftover rice you'd use, but whatever. And then he takes this, he's browning it again, kind of crystallizing it there, bringing out the sugar, he puts it on top of the rice. Again, so totally different method of doing software here that you're going for, right? And then he, relying on some of the same tried and true things, right? He cooks it some more. He adds in an ungodly amount of salt and pepper. I mean, this is why you're so thirsty after eating this stuff, but whatever, let's just run with it. And then you'll see he even adds some soy sauce at the end, right? So salt and pepper on top of that, and it's just like, doesn't that looks great? So, let me wrap up here and we can watch the rest of it. And you see he kind of mixes it all together. He's the one thing the metaphor doesn't work out is he's not constantly tasting it. He's not like one of those Western chefs who's like a big Chef Prud'homme kind of person who's really taken tasting to an extreme. I guess they kind of know what it's going to be like. But what you end up with is something that looks delicious, right? That's really going to be fantastic. And it's this totally different way of cooking fried rice, and we just had to be patient and kind of go for it and try it out. And oh my God, he's serving pickles with it. Who serves pickles? And put some nicely cut things on there on top. So I think what you end up with, and you can see that's too, is like this is, I think, a good metaphor for just like relax into it, start small. He started with 2 projects here. And just kind of like try a new way of doing things, kind of learn and watch from the experts. I mean, if you're looking to improve, that means you don't like the way that you're currently doing things. You're not just looking to take costs out by having a discount rice or, figuring out a cheaper way of doing things, but you're actually looking for a genuinely different way of going about doing stuff. And I'm pretty sure that whoever eats that is going to achieve great IT business alignment because they've enjoyed this new type of rice. And, there you go. Looks delicious. So I want to just wrap up, with a few little programming notes. I finally got the access and took the time yesterday. You can now go find the full archives of this Tanzu Talk Daily and all the interviews that I do. Let's zoom in there. I'll put a link to it. But if you just look up the VMware Tanzu YouTube, you can find the show notes really easily. I still need to go to our page and update when we go to tanzu.tv. I think I have the learning now to actually make my own show notes and do things like that. But you can go through here and, you can go to YouTube, and especially, the daily ones, of course, are the best. But you can see some of the things you might have missed. Like this is actually a really great one. If you subscribe to the podcast, you got this. But you can see the interview that I had with Robbie about finding business value. I think that's a wonderful one there. We've got all sorts of other episodes that you can check out there. But, if you've been wondering, why do I have to do things over here in Twitch land, now you can do it there. And so, as always, just to give you a little bit of the CTA stuff, right? If you're interested, you can always just ask me, and I'll try to route you around to things. But here's 3 things that you can do. Your call to action, as we like to say. Here's another, I always like to mix in the inside stuff. Here's your homework, dear listeners. Those, you should tell me. You can go look up what ABM is. ABM. It's what all the kids in marketing are talking about nowadays. But your CTA is like, listen, if you're interested in delving in more, we have a lot of great material over at kube.academy. You can go check it out. It's kind of a self-paced way of learning about Kubernetes, and they're kind of climbing up the stack. There's a great new one there about Kubernetes for VI admins, right? You can just get Kubernetes up and running now in vSphere. So it's right there. You don't have to spend a lot of time planning. You can start small and kind of find those teams and kind of see how they want to use Kubernetes. You can also layer on top things like the Tanzu application platform, start to think about providing that full platform. But, I know there's a lot of operations people out there who are just trying to figure out Kubernetes, and that's there for you. Now, going up the developer stuff, we have a great developer portal. I'm sorry about the URL. Listen, we're at a big company. We just got big URLs. We should come up with a shorter one, maybe tanzu.dev. Would be a fun one to get that sends you to this. Oh, I should tell people about that. Let me make a note here. We should really whoa, look at my caption. Have tanzu.dev as a 4-word URL. That might drive the official corporate police crazy, but whatever. But We've organized all of our developer-centric stuff at tanzu.vmware.com/developer. And like I mentioned last time, we're going to be getting a lot of the Agile stuff there. And then finally, whether it's an hour-long chunks or longer, if you want to really start figuring things out, you want to start small and start in your transformation, we have all sorts of workshops you can look at. And if you want to find references to that, including how to get the workshop, you just go to kote.pizza. You can find all of that stuff. That's just a short URL that has stuff. And, I'm not going to broadcast on the weekend, and I'll be back next week daily, usually at 11 a.m. Amsterdam time. I forget if I have an interview lined up. I'm going to have Robbie Clutton back week after on the 23rd, I think, to kind of talk more about that. But, we'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye.